Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Got a great crowd, and I see our attendee numbers are going up. So thank you for joining us today for the Financial Data Exchange's quarterly webinar series. My name is Tom Carpenter, and I serve as Director of Public Affairs and Marketing for the Financial Data Exchange. For those not yet familiar with the Financial Data Exchange, or FDX, we're a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting a secure, common, and interoperable industry standard for financial data sharing. You might be wondering, but wait, what does that actually mean? Well, put simply, FDX is seeking to transition the financial services industry to an API-based data sharing so that consumers can share, use, and leverage their own financial data in a much more transparent and secure fashion, and without having to share their login credentials. FDX members include just about every corner of the financial services industry, along with consumer groups and other stakeholders. Now on to today's webinar. Open finance, or the ability for consumers and businesses to access, share, and use the full spectrum of their own financial data with different fintech apps and financial services, is everywhere. But what is the consumer or the user experience actually like when it comes to signing up for all these innovative services? To be sure, banks, fintech apps, and data aggregators are clamoring to meet the consumer demand for data sharing. But the process of actually downloading an app, sharing your data, enrolling in a service can often feel like a maze of different screens and prompts, depending on where your data is held or what type of service you're trying to use. This is exactly the topic of our webinar today, the importance of user experience in open finance data sharing. And I'm joined by a terrific panel of experts that are going to help us understand, define, and discuss different elements of user experience that are most important to us. So I want to go ahead and get started and introduce our panel. First, we have Bill Jetter, who's the Global Direct Connectivity Product Lead at Intuit. We also have Julie Jackson, who is the Product Manager of Connected Banking at JPMorgan Chase. And we have Adam Russ, who is Senior Policy Advisor at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, or NCRC. So thank you so much for joining us today, Bill and Julie and Adam. I know we're going to have a great discussion today, and then we'll leave some time for audience Q&A, so that if you do have a question, please submit it in the chat function, and we'll try to get to it at the end of our session. So in terms of starting off on this question of user experience, I'd like to start with a question for the group, really at the most basic level. What do we mean when we say user experience and user permission data sharing? What's the scope of it? What's included? I wonder if you could just each give us kind of a definition of how you think of user experience, and Julie, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Yes, thanks, Tom. User experience really encompasses the entire range of interaction that a user would need to do to make decisions, or to choose to, in this case, share their data with another third party. So and that could be the set of screens that they might need to use, as well as other considerations like ADA, screen readers and other components.
Thank you. Bill.
More effectively may invite a user to share their financial data. And that sharing of financial data could speed up a lot of the processes that might have been done manually. That sharing could provide a rich data detail that could provide a lot of insights to the user. And so there's a lot of incentive for the user to share their data, to improve their experiences. And what we see is that often that user in today's age might take up that invitation on a smartphone or a small device. And so we're asking the user to share something, financial data, which is very secure and very close to the heart of a user, to make sure it's done right, through an application that's typically small, where we have to balance three different aspects of that experience. What transparency do they have into what they're doing, and how's that data going to be used? How's that going to be shared? what control do they have over that data use? And again, what's the ease of use of going through what could be a rather complex process? So within consumer permission data sharing, UX is balancing all of these different parameters, if you will, to deliver an experience to the user where they feel confident and in control of the data they're sharing.
Thanks, Adam. Bring us home on this question.
Yes, well, I'll just add to that because I think UX, when you think about UX, you're talking about design, but then why? Why is UX the step we're taking? You know, I think what we're talking about is a better way of thinking about the communication that goes on between a consumer and a product, right? And I think the differentiation that is really key, at least from an advocacy perspective, is that, you know, what we have now is a legal system. The goal is to be compliant. What we want is a system that is both legal but also useful, right? So we design things not just to be accurate, but to be explainable, and we can judge them by, you know, the agency. The end result is what can the consumer now do with this, since it's been put into a UX framework.
Got it. Super helpful. And Adam, I'm going to pick up on that question here in a couple of questions. So hold on to that thought. Maybe additional question for the group. You know, one challenge that presents itself almost immediately when we talk about user experience today in this very innovative marketplace, we have thousands of fintech apps, use cases, financial institutions. So user experience is really kind of all over the map today. And I wonder if each of you could maybe help us understand a little bit where that lack of consistency has been most problematic in the ecosystem on this issue. And maybe Adam, I'll let you you start on this, and then we'll go the reverse order for the group.
So I think I'd start by saying that I think this is almost as important in terms of perception as it is in terms of the actual events that occur. But, you know, the truth is that most people, there's a recent Pew study that said that 4 out of 5 people think they have no control over the data, and that they don't get the value that they want when they do give up their data, right? So people are very much flummoxed about what's happening. In terms of where, you know, there's many examples of where there's a problem, and the one that I'd probably share, and I think there are many, right, is that a lot of these apps are temporary. The banking relationship is somewhat permanent, or at least long-term. You use an app, you've given someone your information, maybe you close the app, drop the app, and what's out there now? You don't know, right? So there's all these complicated interactions going on that, again, they're just completely outside of the sense of agency and control among the consumers who are using them.
Appreciate that. Bill.
Yeah, this consumer permission data sharing ecosystem is new, and yeah, we're on a learning curve together on how to do this. Both providers of data, recipients of data, the end users and intermediaries, and how this works. And we are balancing these different needs of the transparency of legal disclosures, of what makes for an awesome user experience in terms of ease of use and what the controls. And we're still trying to figure out what the right balance is, because at the end of the day, you know, if we have to present a long legal terms of service disclosure to the user through a laptop, that's going to defeat some of the ease of use, and we won't get adoption. And so we're still figuring out how this works, but Intuit has been at this for a few years. I'm happy to say that we are learning from our experience, and we are improving the experience. But one of the things we could probably use is some gathering, if you will, of these experiences and insights, and document those or memorialize those in some guidelines. So I'll leave it at that.
A good tee up for later in the conversation, Bill. Julie.
Yeah, I would add to that you know, customers have the population has relationships with a lot of entities, a lot of financial institutions and other places where their data is stored. and they want to use a variety of applications to to help get insight on where they are, and that takes sharing that data from all of these sources to all of those recipients, and the challenges in managing that, right? And today, everyone who's participating in this, it has implemented a variety of different descriptions on what they're sharing and how they're sharing, and it becomes confusing for the user, even as they're interacting with all of these apps. So it's really important to get some consistency to the user so that they really understand what it is they're sharing and from whom.
Thank you, Julie. Super helpful insights there. So Adam, I'm going to come back to you with an individual question and kind of go around the horn with some specific questions for each of you, but please do feel free to weigh in on any questions you hear that you've got some good thoughts on. Adam, I want to switch gears a little bit with some individual questions for you. And NCRC, National Community Reinvestment Coalition, comes at these issues with a singular consumer focus to ensure that consumers are protected, that they receive proper information and disclosures when they consent to sharing the data, some of which you've talked about already. With this in mind, and I know we've already, I feel like everybody's used the word balance. We're trying to kind of find the right mix here. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about where NCRC sees that balance. Obviously, if it takes 25 screens for a consumer to get through the process of signing up for an app because you want to be doubly sure that they've gotten every possible disclosure and double click that box, you're probably not going to have many consumers following all the way through and using the service. And so, I don't know, I wonder if you could really kind of hone in on that balance question.
Sure, and I think you're exactly right what you're hitting on about balance, right? And I think it's about balance, and it's about getting it right quickly. Right now we're in a transition time in financial services. We're still in an era when people expect the ability to use a branch to conduct their banking. But we're transforming also to an era when people have to, they expect to be able to use their financial services through a digital format. So right now institutions have to do both. The old system, one of the benefits was that it had trust, right? You went into the branch bank, you expected to be able to be, to get an answer when you wanted it. And that's kind of the way the system works. There was a lot of relationship duration too. Now we're in this new way, the fintechs are breaking in. The fintechs are, they don't have the relationship and they're trying to create trust, but it's a challenge. The existing banks have to find a way to pay for this investment. So we want to get it right quickly. From the perspective of NCRC, our belief is that the banking system can do a lot to address inequalities, to help people build wealth. And home ownership is obviously one that you'll hear about, but I think a lot of what's happening here is that the first steps, right? Just getting a bank account is an example of something where UX matters, right? And Tom, you said 25 screens, and that's bad, right? I think our goal has to be more than just be not that bad, right? We want to be a little bit better than that. I've seen onboarding processes. I've spent a lot of time working on the unbanked. I've seen onboarding processes that take almost that many screens to just get a prepaid debit card, and that doesn't work, right? So we need a way for UX to win, and I'll go back to my unbanked example. But my experience is that the banks that can find the way to get new customers into the banking systems are the ones that make onboarding the easiest. It's not necessarily the ones that have the absolute best products, although certainly that helps. But when you present that many screens to people, they will drop off. They'll drop off if it's difficult to do. They'll drop off if they think they're giving up a bunch of data about themselves that may have, may create uncertainties, that they're worried about. We need to streamline things. It's where we are right now in Disclosure 1.0 is that we do things that are legal, right? And we do it with a take it or leave it kind of format. And no one reads the format, and then no one feels like they're getting a value for their data, right? And so there's big doubts there right now. But we need to rethink this. And I really want to say I just feel like advocates and industry share a common purpose, right? This is something where if we get it right, everyone benefits. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, no, I really like that, and I think it's easy to in the fintech world to think that, oh, we're reinventing the wheel, but we really can go to some of those more in-person analog processes with some lessons there. So I appreciate you bringing that to the forefront. Julie, let's go to you. I want to talk a little bit about your role at JPMorgan. What are some of the pain points that you see kind of from your experience or your purview on a day-to-day basis when it comes to user experience in data sharing?
Yeah, so we serve nearly 55 million digitally active customers, and what we wanted to do was move them away from screen scraping as a method of sharing their data, and move them to give them more control and more visibility over what they were sharing, and yet provide the security around, you know, that how they're sharing that data, right? So that they don't have to give their username and password to somebody else. And so as part of that, we need to make sure that we provide the clarity about what they're sharing. And one of the biggest challenges is finding, again, that balance, right? When you have that many people, there are those that really like to click on everything and really understand what it is they're doing. And then there are others that want to really just move through and get to the end so they can use whatever service they're trying to sign up for. And so the challenge is finding that balance between providing the right level of information and yet providing a way to get them through quickly if they so choose. And so, you know, and then with that clarity and consistency across the board. So, you know, it is a challenge.
I appreciate that, and it's great perspective. Bill, I'll go to you next, and you mentioned it a little bit that Intuit has been in this game for a while. Intuit's been kind of helping consumers connect with their own data for a long time, and so I wonder if you could give us some insights from both that historical perspective as well as kind of the current day innovations. What are you seeing in the marketplace in terms of user experience patterns? Maybe to be clear, where is it being done well and where is it being done not so well in the marketplace today?
Well, I won't necessarily share any names where it's being done well or not being done well, but I will share some of the observations we've had over the years. And Intuit's been at this for several years. We are one of the early adopters and promoters of this data sharing, and part of that is figuring out how to provide that UX over an open auth or OAuth experience that can be very technical. And so in the early days, we would see a lot of divergence on user experiences. There are some, from our perspective, who got the right balance of ease of use, control, and transparency right, and provided a simple user experience to customers, and were able to get a lot of informed consents, if you will, to share the data. There were some other cases where we've seen, frankly, some legalese, if you will, or too much legalese creep into the user consent, where with some financial institutions, it could look like a mortgage loan application on a smartphone. So, but I'm happy to say that over time, the industry has coalesced around principles of easy use. I will also share that UX is being taken up outside the U.S. as well, where we're benefiting from a lot of research done in Europe with standardization there, where they've come out with user guidelines. In Australia, where they've come out with user guidelines. And what's interesting is that globally, we're starting to see some commonality across all of these UX patterns and what makes it good for good user experience. And finally, I like to add that Intuit has always done a lot of user research as we've designed user experiences, and we've encouraged FDX to do a lot of those user research as well. And so as we look to making proposals for better user experiences, one of the things we always do is trust the customer, trust the user, gather wisdom from the customer and what makes good experiences and share that out. And so, it was interesting, funny at the beginning, but it's getting to a place right now where everyone agrees on the common principles.
Really appreciate that, and a great transition to talk a little bit about the work that FDX is doing on user experience. And so, as you can see from this slide, FDX recently released version 1.0 of its user experience guidelines for those implementing the FDX API. And in this broad guidelines document, it specifies what information and control must be given to end users in the enrollment process. It also helps to accelerate design of data sharing experiences in the marketplace. And it ultimately seeks to create a user experience, as we've been discussing, across the industry that is more consistent and familiar. Bill, you mentioned it. We have taken some lessons from around the globe. These guidelines are also the product of significant consumer testing. They're built from recommendations from FDX members, as well as looking around the data sharing ecosystem to see what user experience is out there and what work has been done in other jurisdictions. Version 1 of these guidelines really helps to define the elements of user experience in terms of the process, offers a screen-by-screen guidance for the design and implementation of each step of the user experience journey. These include everything from initiation, disclosure, selection of a data provider, authentication, consent, authorization, and finally confirmation. These UX guidelines, if you're interested, are available to all FDX members. So if you're not yet a part of FDX, we'd love to have you join us. It comes along as well with the FDX API spec that is free to download and take a look at. So we encourage everybody to do that. But given this work that we've been doing, and I know all of you have really been integral parts to this work to make it happen, to get these guidelines out, I thought we could talk a little bit about what that experience has been at FDX, what our own user experience is. So I'll start with Julie. Julie, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the user experience guidelines. From your perspective, what are we trying to accomplish and solve for, and what do they cover in general?
Yeah, we're actually trying to solve several things. First is to provide again, that consistency, right? So that there's direction about what should end users expect when they're trying to share their data, and that includes understanding what they're authorizing, to whom, and even for how long, and so the guidelines are written in a way that gives standardized recommendations about how that flow is. The first focus is on granting that consent, right? So establishing that share from where your data is stored to where you want to use that data with services, and so we want to try to establish expectations on in each step along the way. When you start at the data recipient, which is where you want to use those services, and how you connect and step over to where your data is, where your data provider holds the data, and how you communicate to the data provider what it is you're authorizing for them to share. And again, we want to make sure that we provide the clarity of who's involved in the process, Sometimes there are intermediaries, data access platforms that help service this connection. So we want to make sure that it's clear that when they're involved, and we want to make sure that the end user understands what it is they're sharing, has that ability to choose the accounts that they want to share, and understands what data is being asked for and why. You know, what are the uses of this data, and all of that should be, you know, it should make sense, right? You know, is the data that is being asked for consistent with what they're trying to use it for? So, and then we want to make sure that the end user is also aware of what control they have after they share the data. And the guidelines really walk through this end to end and give some guidance for each of the steps along the way. And then, you know, it's written in a way so that when somebody wants to actually participate in this experience, whether it's as a data provider or as a data recipient, that they understand, you know, what the expectation is for that role, right? And so what are the things that they need to consider? What are the things that that are involved, again, to provide that consistency?
Thanks. It was a terrific overview. Appreciate that. All right, I'm going to go to Bill. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the process. This was well, maybe you wouldn't call it a labor of love, but I know you all put a lot of time and energy into these guidelines and took a lot of feedback from a lot of parties. So I wonder if you could just talk about the process of what it's like, especially thinking about this as an industry-led exercise. So FDX is a big tent, got a lot of different corners of the marketplace, a lot of competing entities all kind of working with the same goal. Wonder if you could walk us through, maybe you should stick with your, I won't name names, but some of the process. Where were some of the sticking points? What issues came up? How did you come to some solutions?
Well, we are a big tent, and we have a lot of points of view on what makes for a great user experience and what are the appropriate levels of transparency and control. Part of the challenge with, I think, FDX on the whole, not necessarily specific to the UX working group, is that we are designing a technical specification against business requirements, which could be really diverse from across the ecosystem, because how we share data is often controlled under bilateral agreements. And these bilateral agreements could differ from institution to institution and application to application. Whereas you go overseas, and often the business model for sharing data is encapsulated in the government regulation, and as everyone designs the standard or user experience, it's towards that government regulation. And so a lot of what we do under this big tent is just firstly to remind everyone that what we're designing is a capability, not that will support and support in an awesome fashion different business models in terms, or different points of view in terms of how users want to share the data, and not necessarily take a position on why, how they should, in terms of whether they should share it, or a policy around that as well. So a lot of the challenge we have is separating the technology from the policy discussions and getting everyone footed back to the technology. There are cases where we have different points of view, and when we have different points of view, often what we'll do is say, well, let's ask the customer what their point of view is on this. So rather than the product managers or product developers within these different organizations debating, we will agree that often we need to take this wisdom from the customer, if you will, and get their point of view of what makes for a good user experience. And so we've done 2 rounds of extensive user research to help us answer these questions. And as we develop these guidelines going forward, I anticipate that we do more user research to help us with our design.
Appreciate that, and thanks for pushing through on this to get us to version 1. And I know this is going to be an ongoing, a living document, if you will. Bill mentioned kind of going back to the customer, essentially asking them. So I'm going to go to Adam. Wondered if you could talk a little bit about this process and this relationship between industry and a consumer advocacy voice or function within FDX. Another part of the big tent, we have several consumer advocacy groups at the table. I think there's this perception often that there's an adversarial relationship between industry and consumer advocacy groups, so that they're always at cross purposes. And so I wonder if you, Adam, could just shed a little light about kind of how you all were engaged in the user experience process and how you continue to be kind of through FDX.
Well, I'm smiling when you say the adversarial aspect of the process. It doesn't have to be that way. I actually think that, you know, it's best when things work through dialogue. You know, we're better off talking directly to each other rather than meeting in our own little ecosystems and echo chambers, or speaking in, you know, meetings with regulators, but never together. I really think that FDX is kind of an example of something where it's working correctly. I'm on a number of industry groups, and not all of them move as quickly as FDX does, right? This is an environment where if you don't pay attention, they'll move ahead of you, which is good, right? And also that there's some degree of a commitment to be working through difficulty. You know, this isn't to have the least controversial standard. That's not what this is about. This is to have a meaningful standard that has value. And so that's what I'll say sort of generally about the adversarial question, right? I think FDX is doing good things here that meet the goals of consumer advocacy. I would say that, you know, the question of what do the consumer groups want, you know, I think this is about end-to-end control, right? This is about being able to have an experience where along the whole way, the things that the consumer wants to do, which is to, you know, derive meaningful proportional value for their data compared to what it is that they're deriving from the value of the app or the relationship. That's what's really key here, right? This doesn't have to be a zero-sum environment between advocates and industry. I think that I think there are places to align. I think there's a known problem we're trying to resolve, which is, you know, going back to the anxiety, the mystery that consumers have about their data. I think ultimately we can get to the point where consumers going forward feel like, you know, they have that control. They can start a relationship with a product in an environment that's trusted, and they will not end up feeling like they were taken advantage of because of a decision to work with a financial institution. You know, the underlying goal, the thing that I think is really key from how consumer groups look at this, is it's about consumer agency. Right, so we want consumers to be in a situation where they can move in the financial system with confidence. A lot of what you see in disclosures doesn't really lead to any kind of understanding that's actionable. Right, so this isn't just about being accurate; it's about giving people the information that helps them make good decisions. And so that I think is the broad concern that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Really appreciate that. You're a great FDX member. One, you say we're moving fast. We might get you to quote that so we can put it on a T-shirt maybe, and that we're doing good things. And you even mentioned one of our 5 principles of control, of making sure the consumer and user has control throughout the process. So really terrific insight. I'm going to go back to our group before we get to a couple of audience questions that we've already got in our chat. Maybe this is hard to pick one, but if you had to pick today of one element that you believe is really most important for good user experience when it comes to consumer data sharing, what would it be and why? And Julie, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Bill and back to Adam.
I suppose this is actually 2, but visibility and control is what I would say. And, you know, users want to share their data, right? They want to use the services and they need to share the data to do it. So they really want to understand what it is they're sharing, and they want to know that they have control over that. This is their data and they want to be able to control it. So providing dashboards for them to be able to do that, making sure that the user experience is clear, that they understand, so that they understand what it is they're sharing and that they can control it.
Thank you, Julie. Bill, we'll go to you.
Yeah, to Julie's list, I would add ease of use. If it's not easy to use, they won't use it. And they won't go through the journey of sharing the data, and they would get frustrated. And in fact, you can measure ease of use through KPIs of user journeys through the process, and we find that in cases where it's not necessarily easy to use, there is a lot of drop off. And so, and I think that frustrates users that they can't necessarily use an application and not do what they wanted to do. In this case, sharing the data. So. Visibility is important, control is important, but ease of use, can they actually complete the task that they want to do with sharing the data? I would put up there as well.
Great. Adam, I'll give you the last word on this question.
Yeah, I mean, not to be humorous, but I think the problem we're trying to address is about attention span. In many ways, it's about 15 to 20 seconds that people will stay on a web page. Until they find that they're deriving value, and then they'll move on. So it has to be something that gets their attention and gives them a sense that they are in the right place to do what it is that they want to do. And so for me, I think the key aspect of all of this is putting this in the right place. The right place to me is an environment where there's trust, an environment that's easy to get to, that they're already familiar with, right? Those things. They can do what they want to do when they want to do it, and they can change their mind if they want, and the whole process is built on trust. So I think location is really key.
Those are great, all terrific elements that I think we're working on. We'll go to a couple audience questions, and certainly for those that are with us, if you do have specific questions, please put it in the chat. First one asks, says the OBIE in the UK, as well as the CDS in Australia, has already learned a lot of lessons on user experience, and wonder if FDX is going to be learning about this. And so, I don't know, Bill and Julie, if you want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the process to get here, how FDX has looked at the marketplace or other jurisdictions, difference between a regulatory driven versus a market led, if you want to take that wherever you want to go.
Yeah, I could start. Intuit actually follows the guidelines for the OBIE in the UK and the CDS in Australia. And we have taken their learnings as input into our UX guidelines as well. And so sometimes, sometimes it's good to let them experiment with certain design patterns and how to do user guidelines and see what works and doesn't work, and take those learnings and make sure that ours are just as good, if not better. And as a matter of fact, for the UX guidelines, we've looked at just the style guide, if you will, of how the OBIE and CDS did their style guidelines and borrowed a lot from those, where we thought there were good design elements in terms of using it as a pattern for communicating. So it's something where we're learning for them. And I'd also like to share that given different versioning of the OBIE guidelines, I think there's some borrowing, if you will, design patterns coming from FDX. So it's something where on a global basis, I think we're all learning from one another in terms of how to deliver design guidelines.
Appreciate that. Julie, anything to add on that, or Adam, if you have anything as well? All right, we're going to move to our next audience question, which says, does FDX cover the use case of interoperability between institutions in case a user wishes to securely transfer, merge, compile their data from one source located from one institution into a next? The question adds, this is important to gain a flat network effect. So I wonder if you could talk maybe, I guess, about what's next. I know there's a long list at the end of user experience version 1.0 about what's to come?
Well, I'll start. Yeah, in terms of the user experience, that question, if I understand it right, is how do I get a consolidated view across all of my financial positions with different providers, and certainly there are applications out there that allow users to get a consolidated view. The benefit of having within the UX guidelines space is to make sure that users have a consistent experience for incorporating that data into a consolidated application, so that they're sharing that consistently and with confidence across the providers. So with UX, I think that's how I would answer that question.
Thanks. Julie, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say that the entities that are involved, are coming into this with, looking at this from different roles, right? An institution may be primarily a data provider, and maybe looking at how they can securely, how they can get the authorization from the user so that they can securely share the data that was authorized. But they may also, come into this from other roles too, and end up want to be the recipient of data from other, data providers. So, our guidelines don't necessarily prescribe, what role you need to take, but to give general guidelines for whatever role that you are wanting to participate as. So, we're definitely looking for input across the board. I think the more participation that we have from a variety of entities helps us with a better product.
Thanks for that. I think one thing too that we didn't quite talk about a little bit is the fact that this is a UX guidelines, user experience it is a constantly evolving process. Not just because consumer expectations change and innovations change, but also FDX specifically is trying to tie user experience to specific use cases. So we talked a little bit about the very beginning about how, depending on where your data lives or which type of app or service you might be using, your user experience could be different, or the types of disclosures or information you need to make the right decisions is different. And so that is something I know that's going to be put into UX guidelines going forward. But I wonder if anybody kind of has closing thoughts on that. We're almost out of time, but just in terms of kind of what's to come down the road for the FDX user experience, or any final words on where can the industry really move forward in 2021 on this topic?
Well, I'll start. One of the things that distinguishes FDX in our user experience guidelines from other groups that we mentioned earlier, like the OBIE and SDS, is the fact that we are taking a use case approach to how we design our experiences, and so and how we provide the data for that matter. And so in many of these jurisdictions, it's a one-size-fits-all. We are taking the extra step to see how we tailor that experience, both in terms of how that we provide the data and how we provide the experience for sharing that. And a case in point would be, for example, what's the user experience for a personal financial management product versus one that does credit decisioning versus one that is a payment enablement capability for collecting information so users can collect payments. And we have recommendations on all of those experiences based on a use case. And so in terms of the UX guidelines, I see us doing a lot of exploration in terms of how the experiences would differ and how they could be focused on these different use cases. And I think that's something that FDX will probably bring to the global ecosystem, if you will, of entities who are designing these guidelines.
Thanks for that. Julie or Adam?
Yeah, I would add to that our first version of the guidelines addressed how to initiate that or grant that consent. And there's a lot more work that we need to do to talk about what happens after the consent has been granted. So how does a customer, how does an end user manage that consent? How do they go to, where do they go to view it? What do they see? What should they expect to see when they want to view it? Or what kinds of updates can they do? And how do they revoke that consent should they decide that they no longer want that sharing to happen? So, we do still have quite a lot that we need to address going forward. So,
yeah, I'll just add that one of the things that I think is important, it's not just about, the use, right? Within the choice to use a particular product, the cluster aspect of what's happening in FDX, I think, is important. And that goes back to the proportionality of use. But the ability to say, it's not just a yes, no on the use of this, but I'll give up some of my data because I only want to do this one thing. That's a really important piece of control to give to an end user.
Got it. Thank you. Terrific panel today. Thank you, all three of you, for giving us your insights. We ran out of time. I've got a host of other questions here waiting for us, but we're out of time for today. So I just want to thank everybody for joining and thank everybody for participating in this quarterly webinar. We do try to do these 4 to 5 times a year, so look for our next one. I also encourage you to go to financialdataexchange.org if you want to learn a little bit more about us, and also to follow us on our social media feeds so you can learn more about the type of market deliverables that FDX is putting out there at fdx.org on Twitter or at Financial Data Exchange on LinkedIn. So until next time, thanks again, panelists. Really appreciate the conversation on user experience, and thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you again soon.